Welcome to Conflict Wise. Conflict is often seen as a problem that's best avoided or resolved. But what if conflict is really a hidden opportunity?
A hidden opportunity for change that is lost if we rush to release the tension it brings. Not only the tension between us, but also the tension within.
Yes, in Conflict Wise, we tackle typical situations and share practical ways to use conflict for change.
Our topic for today is, should I forgive? Somewhere inside us, there's usually this small whispering voice of a moral code that says you must forgive.
It's a big question, Eva, because in many ways, even the question can torment us, right? In terms of should I forgive, and particularly if in most cases, the question of should I forgive is linked to hurt. I've been hurt, or someone I care for, or a situation that is important to me, someone has been hurt. And so the forgiveness and should I forgive is quite a key question that comes up so often in our work, and it's part of life.
Yeah. So when you think of it, I mean, for sure, an offense has been committed. And if we forgive, does that mean that we wipe out that action? Can we afford to wipe out that action?
Yeah, and because with forgiveness, and we'll come back to this theme more than once in this little conversation, an offense committed cries out for accountability or in some way to set the matter straight, to set it right.
And when you think about faith communities, sometimes they hold out this expectation of forgiveness. And it's kind of like, I don't know, you leapfrog from the place of where an offense was committed all the way over to this lily pad and land on a place of forgiveness. But really, it disappoints because you end up with pseudo forgiveness because there can't be shortcuts.
Absolutely. Yeah, that whole jumping over it by, we've seen it too often in our work, right, where people will jump out, and the intent is good, but the result is not. And part of our conversation, we're going to unpack some of the results of when we forgive or don't forgive.
So we talk about how do you actually find forgiveness, and I think finding forgiveness requires a huge amount of courage as you walk along this uneven and bumpy road.
So a key question is, does forgiveness help you to regain a sense of well-being and a release of deeply held negative feelings? Or does it make you a doormat where your act of grace will be used to exploit again? And it is a key question, particularly in our key ongoing relationships, in whatever form, be it in our family, our close relationships, be it in our work context, or anything where there's a continuing relationship.
So we want to look at what could forgiveness look like. So maybe even how would we define forgiveness, John?
So if we think about forgiveness, really forgiving is a decision to release the thoughts or the feelings of resentment and revenge towards the other, regardless of whether they've earned it or not, right? So it is it's a thinking about, right, the process.
Yeah, I think what you release, what I noticed in what you said is that you're releasing your thoughts, you're releasing your feelings about revenge, but you're not necessarily wiping out the act, because sometimes the act is too important to remember. So, oftentimes you always hear the thing of forgiving is not forgetting, and it can't be forgetting because some things are much too important to forget. You need to remember so that those things will never, ever happen again. And there also are no shortcuts to forgiveness. So think about when people go to confession, what do they do? What's happening inside of them? Most often they feel a sense of guilt, and so they go to confession. Well, there's also an emotional focal point to forgiveness, and that's anger. So in anger, you have to ask, like there's the offense committed. I often see it, forgiveness. I
Yeah.
see forgiveness on a continuum. I see the offense committed over here. And if you're going to leapfrog, you leapfrog all the way over and you only end up with pseudo forgiveness. Or what you do is you recognize that there are no shortcuts and you have to walk the whole way along the line. Okay, so if you're going to walk the whole way along the line, what's the emotional focal point? Well, the emotional focal point is anger. And so with anger, this is where it's a hard road, and it's an uneven one, and it's bumpy, because you have to ask who is responsible for what actually happened. So it means that you've got to tell that story. You have to acknowledge what you actually felt.
Because Vi, you know, if I'm not forgiving you, it's running in my head. We ruminate on it, right? It's in those fine details that my thoughts are running and my feelings are connected to those small little details. And as you say, that there's a sense of loss or grief, right, around these issues of in relationship where we've experienced something. Often it's a loss of trust. It's a loss of something in the relationship that you thought you had, or the expectation that was held, whatever it is. And so there's a grief piece to this as well.
Yeah, and I think that's sometimes that we don't think of with forgiveness. We don't think that grief is a part of forgiveness, but grief has to be there, because there's always something significant that you have lost when you've been hurt. And so if you get to the place of feeling that extreme sadness, it doesn't feel good, but maybe that's a necessary part of the journey. And then you move to, hopefully, to a place where you can accept that this is where you're at, this is it. And if there's at least some acceptance, doesn't mean that you're accepting the act and what happened and nothing makes that okay, but you're giving up at that point, holding on tenaciously to the wrong that was done to you.
And so how do you know that you actually have forgiven, or in the process of forgiving, that it's actually working in some way? A couple of things. One is that corrosive anger that held you, there's a sense of being free from it. And that's a really important, so it's like an inner peace in that sense. It's not forever, and we'll come back to that. And one of the consequences, you can respond to the person or persons if it's in a context, right in the moment. So your ability to respond, to be immediate in relationship, is not being filtered and impacted by that sense of anger or resentment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So John, now let's look at, because this is where it gets a little bit muddier, right? When you look at accountability and forgiving, and how forgiveness cannot ever be a substitute for accountability.
It's so important, right? And this is an area where we see people struggle with. I mean, at times I struggle with it in terms of what do I do? Because often people are looking for conflict resolution in a particular area. And part of that is actually taking responsibility or having the grace to let something go. But forgiving, if the forgiving process reinforces the misbehavior, the problem of the other person, and it's received by them as an opportunity to escape the consequences of harm inflicted, then it's a problem. In some ways, it's almost like a get out of jail free card, right, in that context.
Yeah.
And so forgiveness without accountability, particularly in the context of ongoing abuse, where there's a power differential, is not acceptable. Because in that case, the victim needs protection. And it's a really key point. Take, for example, in the case of child abuse, to encourage the child, or even people who are responsible for that child, to go a forgiveness route on the part of the abuser is a problem. And what's needed is that child needs protection. And the same thing would apply, if you think about it, to workplace harassment, to spiritual abuse, where people have used spiritual authority in a way that's influenced people, and there's a power differential in that situation. So this idea of that forgiveness is a substitute for accountability is not okay. So if it does not obligate you to reconcile with a person that continues to harm you, often there's that sense of almost an obligation, and it can come from various sources, that I need to reconcile. But if the person can continue to harm you, then you need something else. And that's why we have processes, procedures, grievance processes, we have whistleblower processes, we have the justice system, and we have social systems to help those victims in those situations. So it's really important not to confuse the act of forgiveness with accountability.
Yeah, it's so important. You know, I think about us in the world that we're in. I was reading a little bit of Desmond Tutu, and I want to read you a quote from him. And he said, "The quality of our human life on this planet is nothing more than the sum total of our interactions with one another." I love that comment, because it was just like, this is life. And we live in this world where we all came, like, think about the abuser, think about the perpetrator. Everybody came from somewhere. And in our world, things go so terribly, terribly wrong. I don't know about you, but, you know, sometimes when I think about forgiveness, the thing that comes to my mind is, well, I have 8 grandchildren, and so I love little people. And I can't even tell you what the movie is, but I know that I watched a movie where of children who were soldiers, right? And you see them killing, and you recognize, like, you know that no child came out wanting to do that. And you think about the whole thing of evil in our world, and what happens to a person when they're in really harmful, hurtful situations where they have to try to make good of something. And whether I'm watching a movie, or whether I'm, you know, reading a book, or whether I'm looking at somebody, I hope to still see the light to come in. The incident on the movie that really got me was looking at this child. There were 2 children, and they were going into a school now to kill a bunch of other children. And the older girl took the little guy on kind of like a brother. He wasn't her brother, but he took him on as a brother. And she knew what was about to happen, that they were going to kill these other children. And so she quickly grabbed him, and she closed his ears, and she started to sing, and she pulled him away. And I thought, even in the most horrendous situations, there is some mercy there. There was some light coming through. And I wondered, what does forgiveness mean in the light of this, or in any of the horrific acts in our world? And, you know, what you know is everybody has a very long history. People have been hurt for generations, and there's so many extenuating circumstances. And can we find the light? What I love about forgiveness is an opportunity to restore, renew, reset. It's a major, major reset. And what are we going to do? We can either continue on the path that the other person is on, if it's still a dark path, and we can just join them on that path, or we are called to the light, and that's the road we walk, and that's what we bring.
So delightful, Vi. You know, as you talk, it reminds me of back in the 90s when I actually had opportunity to work with Desmond Tutu in a number of contexts. But the one that just comes to mind in this one was, as you know, he was the key leader in the Truth and Reconciliation process in South Africa. Mm-hmm. And I remember the dilemmas around how should, you know, to what degree should there be justice versus this whole process of forgiveness, and all the discussion and beautiful debate around that. And I think at the end of the day, what was chosen is we together as a nation chose to move forward, right? To actually, that light you talk about, to look to the light and to act for the future. But we realized that we had a past that in many ways was buried, right, in all kinds of trauma and acts of evil in so many different and significant ways. And that whole process of sharing forgiveness as a nation and made public. And so that whole truth and reconciliation process, one of the differences between that and many and other places in the world is it ran on public TV in 16 different languages every day. It wasn't in that way, in many ways, a public process. There were some private, respectful moments in all of that, but a lot of it was public. And so I think that forgiveness truly is a choice, right? It's a choice about the way we go forward. There's some complexity in the choice, which we've unpacked a little bit here. But if I think about, so practically what now, it's one of the thoughts that comes to me quite clearly is, although I've just been saying it's a public process in that Truth and Reconciliation Commission, it actually truly is an inside job, right? Forgiveness is something that I am choosing. It's very personal in a way as to what it is. And so let's just talk about what now.
Yeah, so even thinking about what's the other person's story, I think is really important. Seeing if you can be empathetic and curious, that would be one for sure.
Yeah, as we shift to that other and letting it go, I mean, what we're doing is we are freeing ourselves from being a prisoner to other person's change, the other person's change. And we spoke a little bit about it when we were talking about revenge. But forgiveness is about that, because as I choose to be gracious, to release you in terms of me, you are still accountable for what happened in your behavior. But for me, I'm not holding on to that. And there's something really, really important in that. But it's not an easy one. We need to be patient with ourselves in the situation. And so if you're struggling with forgiveness, know that you're not alone. It is a struggle. And I think, I know you and I have spoken about this, that struggle is really important because part of leapfrogging is to jump over that struggle. But that very struggle, it really is important. And it's not a one-off act. And all of us would know, everyone listening to this would know, is that you forgive and then it comes back. And sometimes surprisingly, in surprising moments. And we're hard on ourselves. So, well, I thought I'd forgiven, and then you get hard on yourself. No, it's an ongoing choice. I remember one situation go right back. 22 years later, it comes back to him, almost as strong and deeper emotions as I felt at the time. And I had to just say, I released that person, right? And in that, I know that choice. And it wasn't just in one-off moment. I struggled with it for, in fact, a couple of days. I was back into the rumination about it. But then I remember the choice of saying, no, I let you go. I've made that choice, and I'll do it again. And I'll probably have to do it again tomorrow or the next year or in 5 years' time. But I make that choice.
So just as we end today, we want to bring you back to that original question. The question of, should I forgive? And the choice is yours, right? You can... it's up to you. Whatever you do, whichever choice you make, it's going to have a dramatic impact on the world around you, the immediate world and the larger world. And you can either choose to harm or to help. Which one is it going to be? What I really like about forgiveness is an opportunity to set right.
Really is. It's that opportunity, and ultimately it provides opportunity and possibility for the person who's done the harm, right, to you or to others. It also does as well. With it comes that, as we've said, accountability, but there is an opportunity. So it truly is a choice to be free to act rather than being held by the past.
Well, and I hadn't really thought of it so much like that, but that actually gives another choice to the other person because they have another chance, the other person, which is cool too.
Yeah, and often we forget, Vi said a bit earlier about being able to reach over to the other person, right, and be curious about what's going on for them. I mean, too often people are so hard on themselves around stuff that's happened. We don't necessarily see it because it comes out in all kinds of ways. But to be given that choice that's amazing, and that's
Given the
that's
chance
yeah, exactly. It's a
for the
chance,
other person to be given the chance. We get the choice, and the other
and they
person
have the chance.
chance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And with that chance, they can also choose. So it's
Right.
it works all the way around.
Yeah.
I'm John Ranford, and together with Viola Neufeld, we'd like to thank you for being part of our quest to help people use the conflict they find themselves in for constructive change, both themselves and for others. If you found this video useful, please subscribe to our Conflict Wise channel and share your opinion in the comment section and tell us what you think about should I forgive.